All right, so today we're going to be looking for questions 9 through 16. That's on our notes. 9 through 16, we're going to learn how to solve each equation by completing the square. We talked about square roots yesterday. So now we're going to learn a new method, how to solve by completing the square. When we say solve, basically I'm asking what value for or the variable, so what value of the letter will make that statement true. So question number 9, what value can I put in for A to make that statement true? Because my highest exponent is a 2, I'm actually expecting 2 answers, right? If my highest exponent was a 5, I will be expecting 5 answers. So again, I'm looking in what values of A, and there's a few ways how we can do this, but the way we're going to learn today is called completing the square. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have everything that has a letter on one side and everything that does not on the other side. And when I say sides, it's basically separated through the equal sign. So everything that has a letter, let me put it on one side. Everything that does not, let me put it on the other. So the minus 21, let me move it to the other side as a plus 21. Every time we move something from one side to the other side, we switch the sign. So that gives me a squared plus 4a. Let me leave a space. And this is equal to 21. And then my goal is my first numbered, the first numbered in front of the a squared should be a 1. So the very first number should be a 1, which it is. And then I look at the second term, right? If it is not a 1, divide everything by that number. But because it is, I look at my second term, 4a. I'm just looking at the number 4. And then I ask myself, what's the half of 4? In this case, it's 2. So I'm even going to write plus 2. Again, that comes from the middle term. So then I'm said, all right, plus 2. I'm even going to write it down because the half of 4 is 2. But then I ask myself, what is that number squared? So what is 2 squared? In my case, I will say, well, 2 squared is 4. What I'm going to do is let me add a 4 to both sides. The way I came out with the 4, remember I started with 4/8. I got the half of it, which is 2, and then I squared. That's how I got the 4. Now I'm gonna factor things out. The nice thing is the left side, a squared plus 4a plus 4. If I ask you to do the diamond thing, remember what we used to do, that diamond thing, look for numbers that multiplied is equal to 4, but when you add them is equal to 4. The nice thing is that you're gonna get 2 and 2. We're gonna get this squared. If I was to factor the left side, it will give me a plus 2 all squared is equal to 25, right? 21 plus 4. Technically, the left side, we were able to complete a square. We made it all squared. That's why this method is called completing the square. Now, yesterday we said we can undo an exponent. I wish I could just write a plus 2, right? Undo the exponent. And yeah, we can do that as long as we do the square root on both sides. So I have the a plus 2 is equal to, for this moment, let me write positive or negative 5, right? The square root of 25 is positive or negative 5. All right, now I want the a by itself. So the minus 2, the plus 2, let me move it over. So I'm going to say a is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 5. Now, let me actually use a plus or minus to come out with my answers. If I use the minus sign, and in my case, I'm going to use the minus sign first. If I use the minus sign, negative 2 minus 5 gives me my first answer. It is negative 7. If I use the plus sign, negative 2 plus 5, it gives me my second answer. It is 3. Those are my 2 answers. Make sure you use the minus first. Let's write the negative, the smaller number first. I'm going to write my numbers in numerical order. So let's use the minus sign first and then use the plus sign. Remember, my key was negative 2 plus or minus 5. And that's how I come out with my answers. Right now, some of you might be like, whoa, where did this come from? Let's do a couple examples more. Let's take a look at question number 10. Let me separate my sides through the equal sign. My plus 51, let me move it over as a minus 51. So that's going to give me x squared plus 20x. I'm going to leave a space. It's equal to negative 51. It's okay. We're working with negatives. That's fine. Then my first number, the one in front of the x squared, has to be 1. If it is not, divide everything by that. And then I look at the second term, 20x. And then I ask myself, what's the half of 20? Now I'm even going to write it down. The half of 20 is positive 10. So I'm gonna write this thing down. Then I ask myself, what is 10 squared? 10 squared is 100. So let me add 100 to each side. On the left side, if I was to factor that out, x squared plus 20x plus 100, if I was to ask you guys to do the diamond and find out how you factor it, it will give you x plus 10 twice. So x plus 10 squared. On the right side, negative 51 plus 100, we can type that in. That gives me 49. Then to get rid of the squared, because x plus 10 all squared, I'm going to do the square root on each side. So that gives me that x plus 10 is equal to positive or negative 7. Right? The square root of 49 is positive 7, but also negative 7. I have to consider both cases. I want the x to be by itself, so the plus 10, let me move it over as a minus 10. So it's going to give me that x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus 7. Use that to come up with your two answers. Let me use the minus first. Negative 10 minus 7 is negative 17. The second number, negative 10 plus 7, is a negative 3. When you write your list, right, notice how I have a comma. It's a weird looking comma, but I have a comma, and I have a space after the comma. I should have two answers, right? Some of you might be like, how can I check if this answer is correct? Plug him in. Plug him into the original question. So let's say negative 3, plug it in to every value of x in the original question, and you're going to get a true statement. Like you will get like 9 minus 60 plus 51 is equal to 0. Right? You will get a true statement. All right. Let's take a look at a few more. Let's take a look at number 11. Everything that has a letter on the left side, everything that does not on the other side. So let me write this as x squared minus 4x. Remember my minus 45, I'm going to move it to the other side as a plus 45. So I have x squared minus 4x, a space, equals 45. My number in front of the x squared should be a 1, which is good. If it is not, again, divide it by that number, divide everything by that number. Then I look at the minus 4x, or in this case, a negative 4. And then I ask myself, what's the half of negative 4? This case is negative 2. The half of negative 4. And then I ask myself, what's negative 2 squared? So basically, negative 2 times negative 2 gives me positive 4. In fact, let me do that in red. This plus 4 on both sides, that came from negative 2 squared. I'm adding 4 on both sides. Now, if I was to factor the left side, x squared minus 4x plus 4, if I was to factor it, this thing gives me x minus 2 twice, and this is equal to 49. Right? 45 plus 4 is 49. So I'm going to say I have to get the square root on each, because that's how I'm going to undo the square root symbol. So it's going to give me x minus 2 is equal to positive or negative 7. Right? The square root of 49 is positive or negative 7. I want the x by itself, so this minus 2, let me move it over as a positive 2. So I have that x is equal to a positive 2 plus or minus 7. And that formula is what I'm going to use to come up with my two answers. For my first answer, let me use the minus. So 2 minus 7 gives me a -5. For the second answer, let me use the plus. 2 plus 7. That gives me 9. I'm expecting 2 answers. And remember, I want to write them in numerical order. The smaller number first, right? -5 is smaller than +9. All right, let's take a look at a few more. Let's take a look at number 12. This plus 96, let me move it to the other side as a minus 96. It's okay to deal with negatives. So I have that x squared plus 20x, I'm going to leave a space, is equal to -96. My first number, that one in front of the x squared is 1, so that's good. I look at the 20x, or in this case, the 20, and I ask myself, what's the half of 20? In this case, it's +10. I'm even going to write it. And then I ask myself, what's +10 squared, right? 10 times 10 is 100. So let me add 100 to each side. If I was to factor the left side, x squared plus 20x plus 100, that gives me x plus 10 all squared equals -96 plus 100. That's a +4. So I'm going to write x plus 10 equals, because I'm going to undo the squared. So I'm looking at the square root. X plus 10 equals, I know the square root of 4, right? The square root of 4 is positive or -2. Because I have to consider both cases, positive or -2. My plus 10, because I want the x by itself, my plus 10, let me move it to the other side as a -10. So I have that x is equal to -10 plus or minus 2. And I'm going to use that to come out with my 2 answers. For my smaller number, let me use the minus. -10 minus 2, that gives me -12. For my bigger answer, let me use the plus sign. -10 plus 2, that gives me -8. Notice how my 2 answers, again, I wrote them from smaller to larger. Don't forget the space after the comma. It's pretty simple. Then let me twist things a little, because so far I've been working things out where the right side is equal to 0. But what if that 0 is not on the right side? What if I have things there? The way we're supposed to do this is everything that has a letter on the left side, everything that doesn't on the right side. It is how I want it. So this thing I'm looking at this is n squared minus 12n, let me leave a space, equals -32. Notice I already have the left side with the letters, the right side without letters. Then my first number, the one in front of the n squared, should be a 1, which is good. Then I look at the -12. I look at the second term. And then I ask myself, well, the half of -12 is a -6. Then what's -6 squared? It's +36. So let me add 36 to each side. The left side, n squared minus 12n plus 36. If I was to factor that, that gives me n minus 6 squared. Notice I've been completing on the left side. I've been making everything a square. That's why we call it complete the square, because I complete what is supposed to be squared. On the right side, so after the equal sign, -32 plus 36, that's 4. The way I'm going to undo a squared exponent, the way I'm going to undo an exponent is by a square root. So I get n minus 6, right? I'm going to undo the exponent equals, then I look at 4. Then I ask myself, what's the square root of 4? What number multiplied by itself gives me 4? Obviously, I'm going to think positive or -2. I want this -6 away from the n. So this -6, I'm going to move it over as a +6. So I have that n is equal to +6 plus or minus 2. Okay, so I'm going to use the plus or minus to come up with my answer. For my smaller number, I'm going to use the minus part. 6 minus 2 is 4. And 6 plus 2 is 8. So my answers are 4 and 8. Good. Take a look at question number 14. I have this as m squared plus 16m, let me leave a space, equals -15. I want letters on the left side and everything that does not have a letter on the right side. That's kind of how I have it. I just added the little space after the 16m. Then I ask myself, all right, the first number is a 1, which is good. Then I say, all right, this 16, the half of 16 is 8. Interesting part is that the half of 16. Then I ask myself, all right, what's 8 squared? 8 squared is 64. So let me add a 64 to both sides. As long as I add it to both sides, I'm not changing any values. The left side, if I was to factor it, this, it gives me m plus 8 all squared equals -15 plus 64 is 49. Let me undo the squared. I want m plus 8 by itself is equal to positive or -7, right? The square root of 49 is 7. Well, positive or -7. The +8, let me move it over as a -8. So I have that m is equal to -8 plus or minus 7. That's exactly what I'm going to use for my answer. First one, let me use the minus sign. -8 minus 7 gives me -15. For the second answer, let me use the plus. -8 plus 7, -1. Same idea. Let me take a look at 15 and 16. What if I start throwing in more terms? I want everything that has the letter on the left side, everything that doesn't on the right side. So my -80, let me move it over as a +80. My 3m, let me move it to the left side as a -3m. All right, everything that has the letter on the left side, everything that doesn't on the right side. So that gives me m squared plus 16m, let me leave a space, is equal to 80. Notice I move my letters to the left, none letters to the right, combined like terms. Notice how I got 16m from 19 minus 3. And then I look, all right, the first number is a 1, which is good. 16, the half of 16 is 8. I'm even going to write it, +8. 8 squared is 64. So let me add a 64 to both sides. If I was to factor the left side, m squared plus 16m plus 64, if I was to factor that, it gives me m plus 8 all squared equals 80 plus 64 is 144. So that gives me that m plus 8 is equal to plus or minus 12. Right, m plus 8 by itself, because I did the square root. The square root is how I get rid of the exponent. 144, I get plus or minus 12, because the square root of 144. My plus 8, let me move it over as a -8. So I have that m is equal to -8 plus or minus 12. To come out with my answer, for the first one, let me use the minus sign. -8 minus 12 gives me -20. For my other answer, let me use the plus sign. -8 plus 12 gives me 4. So my answers are -20 and 4. Again, what does the answer mean? The values of the letter that make the statement true. Plug in -20 for m, on the original question, you're going to notice how you get a true statement. Plug in 4 for M, and you're going to notice you get a true statement. Plug in anything else, and you're going to get a false statement. What I mean with a true statement is you get something like 5 is equal to 5. Right? That's a true statement. What I mean with false statement is something like 3 is equal to 5. Right? That's a false statement. So again, the values that we find are what makes a statement true. Anything else makes it false. All right, let's take a look at this last one. So let me separate them to the equal sign. To begin with, the minus 34, let me move it over as a plus 34. Right? Anything that doesn't have a letter, I'm going to move it to the right side. But then this minus 10 squared, let me move it over as a plus 10 squared. Notice I'm trying to combine it with my like terms. So this gives me 5n squared minus 10n is equal to 40. Letters on one side and numbers on the other. I'm hoping the number in front of the n squared is a 1. If it is not, divide everything by that number. Notice at the very, very beginning, I have a 5. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to divide everything by 5. Everything. So that gives me n squared minus 2n is equal to 8. Let me emphasize, all of it, I divided by 5. And I chose 5 because that was the number at the very, very beginning. Okay, cool. So I have a 1 now. Now I can move on the way I was working things. I said, all right, minus 2. The half of minus 2 is minus 1. Minus 1 all squared, or negative 1 all squared is positive 1. So I'm going to add a 1 to both sides. If I was to factor the left side, I'm going to have n minus 1 all squared. On the right side, a plus 1, that gives me 9. Let me do the square root on each side. N minus 1 all squared, and then I get the square root of that. That just gives me n minus 1. Plus or minus 3. Right? The square root of 9 is 3. This minus 1, let me move it over as a positive 1. So I get that n is equal to positive 1 plus or minus 3. For my first answer, let me use the minus sign. 1 minus 3 gives me negative 2. For the other answer, let me use the plus sign. 1 plus 3 gives me 4. Now, some of your cases, like I said, we did this pretty simple. I'm hoping you guys are like, yeah, this is not too hard. In your homework, some of your square roots are not going to be as simple as a whole number, right? You might have like the square root of 11. Square root of 11 is just stays as a square root. Yesterday, we saw square roots, how to type in square root. So you guys should be fine. What I mean with that, like how you guys are going to run into this in your homework. Let's say I have something like n plus 1 all squared is equal to 11. Let's say I have that. So I'm going to say n plus 1 is equal to the positive or the negative square root of 11. Cannot simplify that, right? Square root of 11 is not a whole number. Let me move the minus 1, the plus 1 as a minus 1. So I get that n is a negative 1 plus or minus square root of 11. Like I said, you guys will run into some of those. All right, so while it's my first answer, negative 1 minus the square root of 11. My second answer, negative 1 plus square root of 11. If I was to write things out, that's it. If I was to write it on paper. If I'm going to type it, negative 1 minus the square root of 11, and then negative 1 plus the square root of 11. Again, some of your homework, most of them will be perfect squares. The square roots will be perfect squares. That's why in the notes I wanted to do perfect squares, because that's how most of them are. But some cases, the square root cannot simplify. So just leave it as a square root. Right? The square root of 11, do not give me a decimal. Leave it in simplest radical form. So do not give me a decimal. All right, there it is. Let me stop the recording.